Hello everyone, welcome to Sabbath School Gems, where each week we showcase key concepts from this week's Seventh-day Adventist Sabbath School lesson. Well, hello everyone, welcome to another episode of Sabbath School Gems. This is lesson 4 for the third quarter of 2022, and it's titled Seeing the Goldsmith's Face, and it's from the quarterly In the Crucible with Christ for Sabbath, July 23. Now this title, Seeing the Goldsmith's Face, comes from an illustration that the lesson starts out with. A story about a gold refiner in India who refines gold by mixing it with some substances and heating it to various temperatures, increasing the temperature each time. And what he's doing is he's refining the gold. Probably, my guess is, I'm not really a chemist, but probably those things that he's mixing it with are probably binding at certain temperatures. So you get to a melt temperature of some impurity in the gold and it probably binds with those binders, and then he removes those. So each time he goes to different temperatures and different substances melt at different temperatures, right? Until he gets to the point where he's gotten a lot of the impurities out of the gold. And so the question is, how does he know when to stop? How does he know that he's gotten all the impurities out? Well, he says it's when the gold is shiny enough that he can see his own reflection in the gold. So I think what this is saying is he's using the crucible, he's using this heating process to refine the gold and get it purer and purer. So the topic of this lesson is being transformed into the image of God. The image of God being reflected in us, and we do that by going through life's crucibles. And like the last lesson, I'm a little challenged with seeing how this theme about how we go through life's crucibles to refine us really matches up with the texts and the illustrations in this lesson. So let's go through each of these texts that it gives us and keep in mind that there's a difference between testing the gold and refining it. So what I mean by that is once you have the gold and it's purified, what if you don't know if it's gold or not? And you take it to someone and you say, I don't know if this is gold. Nowadays, there's all kinds of spectrometers and all kinds of things that they can tell what is gold. But let's just say all you had was a furnace and you knew that different materials melt at different temperatures. And so you would put it in the furnace and you would melt it and you would see at what temperature it melts. And if it's iron pyrite, for example, which is called fool's gold because it's shiny and it's gold colored, it would melt probably at a lower temperature. And so you would be able to know once you do that. There's other tests you can do too. You could put it in a corrosive substance, for example, and other things might rust or they might dissolve or they might, corrode away, whereas gold might not. So there's different tests that you can do, but we need to make the distinction between what is a test and what is the refining process. Because what a test does is, it can get rid of some of the impurities, but you don't want to go into the test unless you know you're going to be gold. In other words, you don't want to do the test until you've already gone through the refining process. If you're not fully gold, then all kinds of things are going to happen when you go through whatever test it is. You're going to corrode or whatever. So there's a distinction between, is it a test or is it a refining process? Now, what this gold refiner in India was doing was refinement, heating it at various temperatures and keep increasing the temperature and having substances in there to bind with the impurities so he can take them out. That's all a refiner's process. But I think some of the texts that we're going to be reading and that the lesson study brings out are not really a refining process. They're more like a test. Like, is it gold or is it not gold? I think it'll be clearer when I go through them and we can ask ourselves that question and we can see it. So Sunday's lesson starts out with in his image, and it references a text in Genesis. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. And I think we can all agree that God seems like he wants us to restore us back to that state. He wants us to reflect his image, and he wants this creation to reflect what he intended it. And we know from the Bible and we know from what we look around that that's not the case, that we're not really reflecting God, and this planet is not reflecting how he originally created it. So it doesn't mean necessarily if we're reflecting him that we're going to be exactly like him, but we're going to have his signature on us. We're going to carry his mark on us. Like it says in Revelation 9:4, they were commanded not to harm the grass of the earth or any green thing or any tree, but only those men who do not have the seal of God on their foreheads. And we know in Revelation, those who have the seal of God are contrasted with those who have the mark of the beast. There's only two camps at that point. We will reflect his character. We'll have that stamp. Like it'll be like a signature, like an artist has a certain signature. And when somebody is on God's side and they're like God, they're reflecting him. Matthew 5:16 says, "Let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works and glorify your Father in heaven." Christ was here as an example that we can see what the Father is like. 2 Corinthians 3:18 says, "But we all with unveiled face, beholding as in a mirror the glory of the Lord, are being transformed into the same image from glory to glory, just as by the Spirit of the Lord." So this text talks about being transformed, and it also talks about beholding as in a mirror. Now, speaking of mirrors, the lesson brings up Romans 3, starting in verse 10. And it talks about how we've all sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. But I'm not going to read that. I think that's a start of a quote from the Old Testament. We need to go back one verse to Romans 3:9 to really see what that's talking about. And in verse 9 it says, "What then? Are we better than they? Not at all. For we have previously charged both Jews and Greeks that they are all under sin." And what's happening here is the Jews are thinking that because they're genetically related to Abraham, that they have the law, that they were entrusted with keeping the law, with writing it down, with trying to demonstrate it, that somehow that makes them better. And what the author of Romans is saying is, are we better than they? No, we're not. We're all under sin here. In Romans 3:19 and 20, it points that out even better. It says, "Now we know that whatever the law says, it says to those who are under the law, that every mouth may be stopped and all the world may become guilty before God. Therefore, by the deeds of the law, no flesh will be justified in his sight, for by the law is the knowledge of sin." And when I read this, it sounds to me similar to a mirror, because we can see what is happening is that the Jews think that because they have the law, they were entrusted with it to write it down, to keep it, to preserve it for all those thousands of years, that somehow they have some advantage on righteousness. And what this text is saying is no, just because you have the law, just because you are entrusted with it and you are genetically related, descendants of Abraham, and you call him your father and everything, that doesn't mean that you're any bit more righteous than anybody else. What it's saying is the law doesn't cleanse. Having a knowledge of the law is not what cleanses. It's how that law manifests in your life and transforms your life. And the reason why I think of it as like a mirror is because a mirror doesn't cleanse anything. It just shows you what needs cleaning. You look in the mirror and you see, oh, I got a spot on my face, I have to clean it. It's the same way with the law. The law in itself is not going to transform a person. It's not going to make them more righteous or anything. What it's going to do is it's going to show how we're lacking and how we need God, where we are, and it's going to help be like a roadmap to get us back. It's like having a mirror. If you don't have that mirror, you can't even see if you have a spot on your face or not. And I think the crucible is similar to the law. It's like a test. It doesn't necessarily purify us, because a purification process has to be done before that. Just like we have to be cleaned out before we look in the mirror or after we look in the mirror. It's a separate process. Just like how our lives reflect God's law and how we reflect his character within us is separate from the test of the law or the judgment. So now we get to Job in Sunday's lesson. I'm just going to read Job 1, 8 through 12. It says, "Then the Lord said to Satan, 'Have you considered my servant Job, that there is none like him on the earth, a blameless and upright man, one who fears God and shuns evil?' So Satan answered the Lord and said, 'Does Job fear God for nothing? Have you not made a hedge around him, around his household, and around all that he has on every side? I mean, of course he's going to trust you. You bless the works of his hand, and his possessions have increased in the land. But now stretch out your hand and touch all that he has, and he will surely curse you to your face. And the Lord said to Satan, okay, behold, all that he has is in your power, but don't lay a hand on his person. So Satan went out from the presence of the Lord. And of course, we know the story. Job is put to the test. It's a very severe test, okay? All these trials and tribulations are thrown on him. He loses his family. He loses everything. Did he need to go through all that? Was that a purifying process, or was that a test? I say it's a test. I don't think he needed to go through that. It's almost like we needed him to go through that. Or we need to see, the world needs to see that, yes, Satan, you can say that all you want. You can say that this person, loves God just because their life is good. But God doesn't have to make everybody's life miserable to prove that they're his servants. That somehow God knows the trajectory of our lives, that he's able to see from our lives whether we're going to follow him or not. And in this case, he knew Job was his servant. He knew that Job was going to follow him no matter what. It wasn't because of all those goodies that God gave him. God wants to bless us. But Satan, you see how he's using that. He's saying, well, you're going to bless these people, and that's why they're going to follow you. So that's what this story is all about. But the question is, did Job really need to go through all those trials? And I don't think he did. He didn't need to for himself. He was going to stay faithful to God. He needed to do it for the universe, to show to the universe that people can serve God and God can bless them and they can still serve him, that God doesn't have to give them hardships. And we see this in Job 23, 8 through 10, when it says, look, I go forward, but he is not there, and backward, but I cannot perceive him. When he works on the left hand, I cannot behold him. When he turns to the right hand, I cannot see him. This is Job talking. He's like, where is God? What is he doing? I don't know. I don't understand it. He says, but he knows the way that I take. When he has tested me, I shall come forth as gold. And that word there, when he has tested me, when he's tried me or proved me, it really is a test. It's like a final exam. You have quizzes along the way so you can pass that final exam. But for Job, this is a test. It's not a refining process. He's saying, when he has tested me, I'm going to come forth as gold. In other words, I'm sticking with him. And he can throw all the stuff at me. He can throw all the tests. He can challenge me. But I am not going to let him go. And I'm going to come forth as gold. Because Job has confidence in his relationship with God as well. And even though he doesn't understand what's going on, he's still going to hold on to that. And he doesn't. Reading on there, it says, but he knows the way that I take. This is Job 23:10. But he knows the way I take. When he has tested me, I shall come forth as gold. My foot has held fast to his steps. I have kept his way and not turned aside. I have not departed from the commandment of his lips. I have treasured the words of his mouth more than my necessary food. Wow. That's how faithful Job is. He's treasured the words of his mouth, and that's that's the mouth of the Lord, more than his own food. This is not a refining process. He's already been refined. This is his test. We could say that there's some growth that Job goes through, but whether or not he comes out with this greater knowledge, he passes the test. And he would have passed it without the test. He still would have been faithful. He didn't need that. God doesn't need to tempt us to know whether we're faithful to him. Maybe the world needs it, or maybe the universe, somebody needs it as an example to see that we can go through trials. But God doesn't know that. He already knows our heart, and he already can judge the trajectory of our life. He knows what choices we're making. When we make those choices, when we choose him inside, regardless of what's happening outside, regardless of what it looks like to other people, he knows the true intents of our heart. And the other thing is, he can do that. He doesn't have to have us live 800 years, like Methuselah and these people that were living 700, 800, 900 years. He doesn't have to have us live that long. He can tell, even with our short lives, I think they're relatively short here, even with a relatively short life, even the young person that dies at age 25, he can tell the choice that person made, the trajectory of their life and the choices that they were making. And so he's able to do that like we can't. We don't judge other people, but God can. He can tell what direction our life is going. So now we have this story about Job. So we have the greater knowledge. The question is, will we pass the test? I'm going to read again in Psalms 1, the whole Psalm 1 through 6, because I think this just sounds like Job when he says, my foot is held fast to his steps and he knows the way that I take. This Psalm 1 through 6 says, blessed is the man who walks not in the counsel of the ungodly, nor stands in the path of sinners, nor sits in the seat of the scornful. But his delight is in the law of the Lord, and in his law he meditates day and night. He shall be like a tree planted by the rivers of water that brings forth its fruit in its season. This is Job, whose leaf shall not wither, and whatever he does shall prosper. The ungodly are not so, but are like the chaff which the wind drives away. Therefore the ungodly shall not stand in the judgment, nor sinners in the congregation of the righteous. For the Lord knows the way of the righteous. Isn't that what Job said? He said, he knows the way that I take. The Lord knows the way of the righteous, but the way of the ungodly shall perish. The Lord knows when we're on the same path to him. He knows it. Let's say we don't need this refiner's fire. What do we need? What do we need to get on this right path? Well, it's a choice. Kind of hard to say it any other way. It's a choice. And we have that power. We are given that choice by God. And no one can take it away. In Hebrews 12, 1 through 3, it says, therefore we also, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us lay aside every weight and the sin which so easily ensnares us, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us, looking unto Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith. That's what we need. We need an author and finisher of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and has sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. And that sitting down at the right hand of the throne of God, that is his ministry as the high priest for us. And it says, for considered him who endured such hostility from sinners against himself, lest you become weary and discouraged in your souls. So this is Hebrews. We went through this a couple quarters ago. But this is an encouragement that we should look to Christ and not become wearied and discouraged, but let him do that finishing process, that final transformation. The sin offering was offered, and then there was a burnt offering. And anytime someone sinned unknowingly, they would confess their sins over the animal, they would slay it. There was a whole process. And with that sin offering, there was always a burnt offering as well. So there was two offerings. There was a sin offering and the burnt, always together. They always came together. You didn't just have a sin offering by itself. Those would happen throughout the year. But contrast that with the once a year Day of Atonement. That was a special day. That was just one day a year. That was the day that the sanctuary was cleansed. That was the day that they took all those sins and they transferred them onto the scapegoat. That's when the sanctuary was actually cleansed of those sins. And that was like the final refinement, you can call it. That final refinement is like the finisher. That's what I see as the finisher of the faith. And Christ is now sitting at the right hand of the throne of God. And he's the one that is going to administer that. It's not going to be Aaron. It's not going to be Aaron's sons. Whoever was the high priest would do that ceremony. Well, that is now Jesus as Christ sitting at the right hand of the throne of God. That final transformation, that's the finisher of our faith. In other words, we go through this process here and we get refined. We refine ourselves by our choices. We get closer and closer to God. And then that final transformation takes place at the end of time, at a final Day of Atonement. The Day of Atonement was just one time, one day of the year, 1 hour, who knows how long it took. But it's showing us that there is a final. And that's a final. So all this transformation takes place, and then there's a final atonement that's made. That's not one that we do. We're involved in the refining process by our choices. But Christ is the one officiating as a high priest who officiates in that final atonement. Okay, let's go on to Tuesday's lesson. That's Jesus' last words. But really, it's two parables. It's the parable of the 10 virgins and the sheep versus the goats. And I'm just going to read the parable of the 10 virgins starting in Matthew 25, 1 through 13. It says, "Then the kingdom of heaven shall be likened to 10 virgins who took their lamps and went out to meet the bridegroom. Now 5 of them were wise and 5 were foolish. Those who were foolish took their lamps but took no oil with them. But the wise took oil in their vessels with their lamps. But when the bridegroom was delayed, they all slumbered and slept. But at midnight a cry was heard, 'Behold, the bridegroom is coming, go out to meet him.' Then all those virgins arose and trimmed their lamps. And the foolish said to the wise, 'Well, give us some oil, for our lamps are going out.' But the wise answered and said, 'No, lest there not be enough for us and you. So go to those who sell and buy for yourself.' And while they went to buy, the bridegroom came, and those who were ready went in with him to the wedding, and the door was shut. Afterward, the other virgins came, saying, 'Lord, Lord, open to us.' But he answered and said, 'Assuredly, I say to you, I do not know you. Watch therefore, for you know neither the day nor the hour in which the Son of Man is coming.'" So this parable seems like it's not defining a refining process, it's defining a test, because there wasn't enough time at the end for them to go through the refinement process. It doesn't happen overnight. They weren't able to get that oil in time. And this is how our lives go. You can't just change the trajectory overnight. I think of it as, if you know math and you can picture a graph with the slope of the line, it's determined by points, like you can calculate the slope by 2 points or the equation or something. To calculate the slope, you have to have those 2 points. You have to know which direction. Is the line headed up or is the line headed down? If you don't have any time, you only have 1 point in time, it's really hard to tell what the slope is at that point. And so we have to define the trajectory of our lives before we get to that point in time where it says, okay, here's the judgment. Here's the test. Is the slope positive or negative? Well, it's determined by what was going on before that. It's too late at the end to change it. And the lesson study points to a quote in Ellen White about how this parable, the oil is symbolic of the character. And it's something that can't be transferred and it can't be bought or it can't be sold. And I think that's true. That points to a very similar thing. You can't just change the past in an instant. And that's what this whole parable is about. It's saying, you don't know, watch. And you don't know the hour or the day. So watch and be ready and start charting that trajectory of your life right now, because every day you're charting that. Don't think you're going to just get to some point where you can just change all of a sudden, because that's not what this is all about. This is about judging the trajectory and your choices that you're making every single day. You used to say there's 2 things that you can't have others do for you. She said there's 2 decisions. That everything else you can pretty much have other people do for you, but you can't have these 2 things. She says one of them is select a mate, and the other one is select a profession. She said those things you really have to be committed to, and you should make those decisions. But I think there's a third, and probably the overwhelming of all of them, is to select your character, to make the choice for good or evil. You can't have anyone else do that. Your mom can't do that. Your dad can't do that. Your spouse can't do that. No one can make that choice. That's up to each individual. And the sooner you do it, the better, because you don't know when the master comes. We don't know how long we're going to live. We don't know what's going to happen tomorrow or this afternoon or anything like that. I think that's what this parable is really saying is be diligent. You can't do these things last minute. when it comes to the test and the refinement process, I would say it's a test. It's a test. It's not a refinement. It's too late to refine the gold at this test. You're either going to pass it or you're going to melt and vaporize before you get to that temperature. You're either gold, you've already been refined, or you're not. Ezekiel 18:20 says, the soul who sins shall die. The son shall not bear the guilt of the father, nor the father bear the guilt of the son. The righteousness of the righteous shall be upon himself, and the wickedness of the wicked shall be upon himself. Basically, it's a choice. And we get to that with the sheep and the goats as well. So that's the second one that the lesson study brought out. That's Matthew 25, reading 31 through 46. It says, when the Son of Man comes in his glory, and all the holy angels with him, then he will sit on the throne of his glory. And all the nations will be gathered before him, and he will separate them one from another, as a shepherd divides his sheep from the goats. And he will set the sheep on his right hand, but the goats on the left. Then the king will say to those on his right hand, come, you blessed of the Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me drink. I was a stranger, and you took me in. I was naked, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you visited me. I was in prison, and you came to me. Then the righteous will answer him, saying, Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you drink? When did we see you a stranger and take you in, or naked and clothe you? Or when did we see you sick or in prison and come to you? And the king will answer and say to them, assuredly I say to you, inasmuch as you did it to one of the least of these, my brethren, you did it to me. Then he will also say to those on the left hand, depart from me, you cursed, into the everlasting fire prepared for the devil and his angels. For I was hungry, and you gave me no food. I was thirsty, and you gave me no drink. I was a stranger, and you did not take me in. I was naked, and you did not clothe me, sick and in prison, and you did not visit me. Then they will also say to him, saying, Lord, when did we see you hungry or thirsty or a stranger or naked or sick or in prison, and did not minister to you? Then he will answer them, saying, assuredly I say to you, inasmuch as you did not do it to one of the least of these, you did not do it to me. And these will go away into everlasting punishment, but the righteous into eternal life. So this parable is really, I think, saying a couple things. It's saying there's going to be a final judgment someday. And at that time, it's going to be too late to change. At this time, he's separating the sheep from the goats. You're not going to go back and change into a goat or a sheep. This is it. This is the judgment time. You're not going to go and try to undo the things you've done in your life. It's just too late. You have no time. There's no time left. And the other thing is, it's really saying what you're doing today is determining your destiny. Also, how you treat others is how you treat God. You can't claim to be loving God while you're despising the naked, the hungry, and the stranger whom God loves. It's really, I think, pointing to the same thing, that it's too late to get refined at this point. You need to be doing these things before. And then this is the test, but the test will come. The lesson study says character is what a person is in the dark. And it's true, because others might see you one way. You might be able to fool others, but God sees everything. It's like he has X-ray vision. And this was definitely a lesson that a lot of the rulers and stuff at the time of Jesus had to hear, because they thought that they could just fool anybody, I think. And they were really fooling themselves. And Jesus was pointing these things out to them with these parables. Now, Wednesday's lesson is titled The Wise, and it's, I think, talking about the character of the people at the end of time. And there are some hints in the Bible that there's something a little bit different about the people at the end of time. I'll just read Daniel 12, 8 through 10. It says, although I heard, I did not understand. Then I said, my Lord, what shall be the end of these things? And he said, go your way, Daniel, for the words are closed up and sealed until the time of the end. Many shall be purified, made white, and refined, but the wicked shall do wickedly, and none of the wicked shall understand, but the wise shall understand. There's other evidences too, that the time of the end there is a special people. There is a people who have been even more refined. Perhaps it's because they need to be strengthened to endure the great trials, or because there's not going to be any atonement after a certain point. After the Day of Atonement happens, that's on the 10th day of the 7th month. But they still have to go to the 15th day of the 7th month. That's when Tabernacle starts. So what happens in that time, it's not just, okay, that's the end of all the feast days. There's this other feast day that happens after Atonement, and that's the Feast of Tabernacles, 7-day feast, and then the last great day. The last great day of that feast, that's the last great day. They even call it that. So what happens in that interim? There's like this period. Now, it's not that long because Day of Atonement happens on the 10th day and Tabernacle starts on the 15th day of the 7th month. And then it goes until 8 days after that, counting that as the first day. It's not that big of a period, but there's no atonement in that period of time before you get from Day of Atonement to the last great day. Maybe that has something to do with it. I don't know. But it does look like the time of the end, there's going to have to be a people that's going to stand against all the powers of Satan. It says in Revelation 22:11, he was unjust, let him be unjust still. He was filthy, let him be filthy still. He who is righteous, let him be righteous still. He who is holy, let him be holy still. To me, that just sounds like the Day of Atonement. This is it. There's no atonement after this point. Of course, it's not that critical. Our motivation should be our lives right now, because we don't know. We can go out and get hit by a car or have a stroke or something tomorrow. We don't know. We should live with the trajectory of our life. But there is this period of time, and maybe we're nearing it, when people will need to be really strong and really refined. You know, I think of it, I don't know if you've seen the Sleeping Beauty original Disney animated film there, but there's a point in time when Maleficent, the wicked fairy, who's like the mistress of all evil, she, at the very end, trying to thwart the prince, she turns herself into the dragon and herself. It's like all the powers are against this prince. He's going up to the castle and he's charging through, and he's got his little sword and his horse and he's fighting it. But then she turns herself into this big dragon. It's like she puts all the energies and all the efforts. I think that's how it's going to be. The forces of evil are going to be unleashed at the end of time. And the same way, God's power is going to be unleashed. He is going to be strengthening his people like never before. And it's interesting to think about this, but here too, the refinement needs to happen. It might happen at a very rapid rate at the end of time, but regardless, we should be engaged in that refinement process. And so how do we do that? How do we go about that refinement process? Now, how do we do that? We do that by making choices. We do that by not letting the struggles and the trials of this life weigh us down, by keeping our eyes fixed on God, and by trusting that he has something better for us, and that we don't need to be tempted to sin. All these trials and struggles, sometimes we come out, I've known people and they start blaming God. We don't need to do that. We don't need to go there. We can remain faithful to God even in the face of all these challenges. Now, Thursday's lesson ends with character and community, and I think it's suggesting that there's going to be a time in the end when God's people will reflect him more completely, because it's going to be when we're all united. We started out in this quarter talking about the shepherd and how God is going to gather his children. He's going to gather them together at the end. They'll all be united. Lesson brings this out when it's talking about the body of Christ, and each one is a different member, a leg, and you've got an arm, and you've got a hand and an eye and whatever, and they're brought together. And when they're brought together, you have the fullness there. Ephesians 4:13 says, till we all come to the unity of the faith and of the knowledge of the Son of God, to a perfect man, to the measure of the stature of the fullness of Christ. And this perfection of Christ is going to happen when we're all together. It's the covenant language. I'll just read in Jeremiah 7:23. It says, but this is what I commanded them, saying, obey my voice, and I will be your God, and you shall be my people. And walk in all the ways that I've commanded you, that it may be well with you. That's really what the covenant's all about. It's about obeying God's voice and he being our God and we are his people. We are like his bride that is going to come to him. When I say we, that's the unity. The unity is going to come to him as a bride. We can see this. There's several places in the Bible, but I like Isaiah 62. I'm just going to read 1-7 and see how it's talking about this time when God's people are going to be united as his bride. So I'll read it. For Zion's sake, I will not hold my peace, and for Jerusalem's sake, I will not rest until her righteousness goes forth as brightness, and her salvation as a lamp that burns. The Gentiles shall see your righteousness, and all kings your glory. You shall be called by a new name, which the mouth of the Lord will name. You shall also be a crown of glory in the hand of the Lord, and a royal diadem in the hand of your God. Just like the bride is that crown of glory to the man. And it says, you shall no longer be termed forsaken, nor shall your land any more be termed desolate, but you shall be called Hephzibah, and your land Beulah. For the Lord delights in you, and your land shall be married. For as a young man marries a virgin, so shall your sons marry you. And as a bridegroom rejoices over the bride, so shall your God rejoice over you. I have set watchmen on your walls, O Jerusalem. They shall never hold their peace day or night. You who make mention of the Lord, do not keep silent, and give him no rest till he establishes and till he makes Jerusalem a praise in the earth. So isn't this a beautiful picture? God's people coming to him, being united and being gathered as this beautiful bride. He's finally going to have his kingdom filled with all people with all different talents and abilities, but they're all going to have an aspect of them that reflects him and that makes it known that we are his. And that process, that refinement process starts now. It starts the day we're born. It's a beautiful thing, but it's something that we participate in by making choices. It's like we're getting quizzes all along the way. There will be a final exam at the end, and I just hope that we're all learning as we grow, that we're going through this refining process, knowing that there will be a test someday. The crucible is more of a test, I would say, than a process. So just like last week's lesson, the title and the story theme seem to be a little misleading, just because at face value, it seems to suggest that transformation into God's image happens through this refiner's fire, through the crucibles and the struggles of life. But what is actually being revealed by the text is that there's going to be a final test. There's going to be a final crucible, and it's going to be too late. So the refining process needs to happen before that. And it doesn't happen overnight. Every single day, we are going through that refining process. We're choosing the trajectory of our life by our deeds, by whether or not we're listening to God, and by our actions. And so the conclusion is similar to what it was for last week's lesson. Hebrews 12, 1-3. It says, therefore we also, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us lay aside every weight and the sin which so easily ensnares us, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us, looking unto Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and has sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. For consider him who endured such hostility from sinners against himself, lest you become weary and discouraged in your soul. So I hope we'll take those words to heart and live our life on the trajectory toward God and go through that refiner's fire every moment. Every moment we make decisions, we're going through that and building our faith. Thank you for joining us for this episode of Sabbath School Gems. If you enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe, give us a rating, and spread the word to others. Comments and questions can be sent to us at sabbathschoolgems@gmail.com. Bye for now.